Welcome to the Gird Up Podcast. My name is Charlie Ungemach, and we're glad you're here. We're going to get started in just a moment, but before we do that, I want to ask you to consider helping support the work that we do here by buying us a cup of coffee. Now, we call it a cup of coffee donation because for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help support the ministry we're doing here at Gird Up as we flood the internet with confessional content and help prepare the people of God for whatever lies ahead. If you'd like to help support or fund the conversations that we are having here at Gird Up, go to www.girdupministries.com, select Buy Us a Cup of Coffee in the main menu, and make your donation there. Thank you to those of you who have done so already. You're the ones that make this possible, and I'm very, very appreciative. Our guest today, Mr. Shawn Herkstroeter. What's going on, man?
Hey, Charlie. Good to see you.
Glad to have you here. Glad to have you here. So you were a Wells teacher for many years, and now you have shifted into a new role at Grace in Action. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you do now, what your background is, so forth.
So I was in our parish school system for 28 years, assigned out of MLC to St. Paul's, Menominee. Growing up in Colorado.
Great little town.
Yeah, it is. UW Stout. Yeah, that was a great place to start ministry, but I growing up in Colorado, I just had my heart set on the West and just like prayed, hey Lord, just put me anywhere west of the Mississippi on call day. And the way God works is always best. And it was ironic. He just kind of threw me a stone's throw east of the Mississippi just to kind of, hey, Shawn, I'm in control. But Menominee was a great place to start ministry. My wife taught kindergarten. I was a 5th and 6th grade teacher, athletic director, coached everything. And we started a family there. All 3 of our kids were born in Menominee. Was able to go to grad school at UW Stout. Built a house outside of town. We were comfortable. Spent 9 great years there. We felt like, that's maybe where we're going to spend our entire ministry, and had principal calls come my way, and I'm just like, I don't want to do that. I'm not into that. And finally, a call from Abiding Word Houston came, and God just nudged me out of the nest in a way that I'd never, ever dreamt he would. Imagined living in the state of Texas, never imagined living in a large city, and or even serving in a diverse ministry, and that's exactly where God put us. And we loved every minute of our time in Houston. It was exciting. It was fast-paced. The people there were great, and God blessed it. And lived there. We were there, served there for 7 years. Great time. And my wife is from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and we would go back and visit, and especially like maybe around Christmas time, and we would go, and I'd be like, "Hey, let's just get out of here. I don't think I could ever live in a town like this. I just want to get back south." So, as God is ironic in many ways in my life. A call came from Faith Fond du Lac, and it just felt like it was the right position. It was a school that had been really large at one time. It kind of sunk in enrollment, and felt like we could go in and with God's help, try to right the ship a little bit, and God blessed that. So I served there for 12 years. And we grew from 165 to 280 kids.
Wow.
Added a bunch of staff and a new building project. And things are healthy and rolling there. But along the way, served at Commissional Lutheran Schools for 12 years. And while I was there, Greg Schmill was director, and he took the call to start up Grace in Action, but we always stayed connected. And he just talked to me every once in a while, and even brought me along and permitted me to help on some of his resilience workshops. And Yeah, little by little, we kind of gained traction, and we really started just a small, quiet side ministry about 3 years ago. Like we decided, hey, let's get coaching going in the teacher ranks, and we just did that on the side, and that just grew. And yeah, eventually Grace in Action called me, and so I'm here today heading up their coaching program.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what about you? You sounds like you loved being a fifth and sixth grade teacher, which I can imagine. Like I never actually got to. Well, no, that's not true. I did teach fifth and sixth grade at St. Marcus, but that was just for a year. But I understand. I understand what it's like to teach fifth and sixth grade, and I understand why you would love it. What did you love about fifth and sixth grade? Yeah, let's start there. What did you love about fifth and sixth grade?
Those are kids that are still very impressionable and kind of view their teacher as, somewhat of a hero. And that was, yeah, just a very impressionable age, and good kids, still, somewhat innocent in a lot of ways, and being able to impact them and still be able to have some, some conversations with them at more of a higher level, deeper level. Yeah, and those years were great, but moving into, abiding word and faith, teaching something eighth grade, and eventually, just at faith, position grew where I just taught maybe one or two classes a day at the upper level, eighth grade, seventh grade level. Those kids are great as well. You can joke around with them, and you can still have a serious conversation with them. And yeah, many people think that, eighth graders are kind of a different creature. In a lot of ways they are, but if you kind of get in their train of thought, you can connect with them.
If you can find a way to make like seventh and eighth grade culture really strong, everything about your school is going to go fine.
For
Like
sure.
maybe not everything, but a lot of it gets a lot easier if you can
For sure.
build
Yeah.
good culture in the upper grades.
Yeah.
Why, like looking back, why didn't you think you wanted to be a principal?
Yeah, I think the sentiment that I had is still the sentiment out there with a lot of guys is, hey, it's a lot of work, long hours. You got to deal with conflict, got to deal with problems, and you're maybe not being recognized with resources or pay or time that should be. And so, I was content with teaching and just coaching for a long time, and maybe leading in a different way with athletics. But that changed. And I would say, as I think back, Jim Brandt was a key player in that. He tapped on my shoulder during my time in Menominee, and he had started kind of a principal or a leadership program within our synod, kind of young guys that maybe had some leadership qualities. Hey, let's bring them in and help them polish off their leadership skills and get them thinking about, serving as a principal. And that really was kind of a tipping point for me, and really got me thinking about, maybe I should go do this.
Yeah. So then once you start serving as a principal, sounds like you very much enjoyed that as well.
Yes.
What is it about that particular position that kind of gets you going, that lights your fire a little bit?
Yeah, in the classroom, you can make a direct impact on the kids in front of you, with the 20-some kids that you have, right? And that's super meaningful. As a school leader, you get to impact the entire school, not only students but families as well, as far as how you lead, your approach, your initiatives. You just have a larger influence, and just the challenge of, hey, how do we build a team? How do we build a program? Where do we want to go with this ministry? How do we establish culture? All those were just really fun challenges that I enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you also mentioned you did quite a bit of coaching. Um, I'm passionate about youth sports, and I think every kid should at least give something a shot. What would you say is the value for young people being involved in athletics?
Yeah, there are many, but I would say you have got their attention in a space where they are voluntarily coming to you and are engaged, and through that you can build build these young boys and girls and men and women up in the Lord in just a captivated way. And so, yes, you can, there are the go-tos of, you through sports, you learn to work hard and learn to work as a team. But more than anything, I think we as Christian coaches can use it as an avenue to build up young Christian men and women in a way that many other avenues can't get to them.
Yeah, I think particularly the kids that are sometimes more difficult to reach in the classroom tend to be the kids that, frankly, are perhaps the easiest to reach on the basketball court or on the field, or maybe not the easiest to reach. That's probably not the right way to say it, but it tends to be an avenue that's a little more effective for those kids than in the classroom.
Yeah, and if you ask anyone, who from your childhood kind of stands out, it's almost guaranteed that if they were in athletics, they're going to mention a coach. They're just a coach can be super impressive, be able to impress upon a child in just a really remarkable way.
Yeah. What makes a dad a good coach? Because not all dads are good coaches. And it's not always true the other way either. Not all good coaches are great dads. So what makes a great, like particularly at the elementary school, middle school level, you're mostly looking at parents doing the coaching. What makes a dad a great coach?
Well, they're going to have to step out of their ego, number one. It's not about the wins and losses. And it's not about, any type of agenda that they may have. So they got to kind of remove their ego and remove their bias towards their kid, number one. I guess number two, just coming into a program with a servant heart, like, all right, God's entrusted these kids to me, for this short amount of time. What can I do to build them up, not only just skill development wise, but as young Christian men and women? And there's not a lot of dads out there that I would say are super successful at that. There's a lot of dads that do coach and do an average job, but those that excel, those are few, because it's hard to separate feelings and emotions from when you're coaching your own kid.
I'm gonna press on that a little bit. What makes that so difficult? As somebody who's not a dad either, I mean, what is it that makes that so difficult?
Well, I think number one, you want the best for your child, and so sometimes you can put the blinders on, and just the best for your child might be winning over just development. And so there's probably some dads out there that are gonna probably not be happy with what I'm saying. And you can be a dad and be a great coach, but there are some challenges there in that. Again, your ego, you got to set aside, and you've got to really set aside any personal interests or gains that you want for your kid, and just view this group as a, some gifts from God that you can work with. And the other temptation is to be harder on your kid than others. I coached my own boys in basketball, and unfairly, I probably singled them out more so than other guys, and that wasn't fair to them either.
Yeah, sounds like you'd say it's easier to coach kids that aren't your own.
For sure, it is. Yeah. That that's my opinion, but
yeah,
we do have a lot of dads out there coaching and moms, and many programs we're not going to have unless they are stepping up to volunteer coach. So I think it just goes into their own personal well-being. If they're spiritually, emotionally, and physically grounded, then they can be successful at it.
Yeah. So, like you said, most of the things done in a ministry setting are not done by the cult workers that are involved. Obviously, you have teachers in the classrooms, even athletic directors and things are organizing. But a lot of the rest of that is driven, and even most of congregational life is driven by lay people, right?
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is that there's only so much a teacher can do. And as somebody who's served as both an administrator and then also, well, I guess you've kind of always been an administrator, haven't you? You've either been an athletic director or a like school administrator, I guess at the top of the level. How do you manage? This is something I couldn't even figure out as a single guy. How do you manage uh, that calling with some sort of balance in life? Is the work-life balance thing a real thing? Does it need to be? Um, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all that. Is it possible for a called worker to have balance between the two?
The word balance is an interesting word, and we throw it around there. We need to strive for work and life balance. I kind of like using Dr. Richard Swenson's analogy. He has a book out there on margin, and he uses the analogy of, think about a piece of paper and that margin on the left side. And we as teachers will say, all right, students, make sure that you are writing your work on the right side of the margin. Maybe you could put the numbers to your math problems on the left side, but we're going to keep all the work outside the margin. And when the kids start writing in the margin, it just becomes super cluttered, right? So imagine your life, living with margin. And for each of us, we're wired differently. I think for some people, they can navigate life and ministry with a pretty thin margin and still remain healthy and resilient. And others are wired in a way where they need a little bit wider margin. And so that's really kind of a self-assessment on where you're at. But it's really important to reflect on that and understand how you're wired, and then make decisions to establish that margin and maintain it for just not only health but longevity as well in ministry.
Yeah. What do you mean when you say having margins on your life?
Yeah, so when you get into ministry, you're going to be I think there's always this idea coming out of college or some of a romantic idea of ministry where you get to a site and everybody's excited to embrace you as their shepherd, their teacher, whatever, and students and parishioners just are eager to shake your hand and thank you for what you do, and just every word that comes out of your mouth means something to them. And then all of a sudden, after a few days, it kind of smacks you in the face like, this is hard. Ministry's hard. It's super hard. And you've got challenges, and you've got opportunities. There's many challenges. There's many setbacks. There's many, just emotional roller coasters. And in order to navigate all of those things, you need to understand the importance of just building resilience to maintain that margin. So, specifically, Charlie, I think it basically comes down to this: when we're not spiritually, emotionally, and physically dialed in the way we should be, we permit ourselves to self-medicate in different ways. And that can take on a lot of different forms. For some people, it might be just isolating themselves, kind of withdrawing, right? For others, they may use food to kind of self-medicate to deal with the stress and the conflict. For others, it might be alcohol. For others, it might be porn. For others, it might be just getting lost behind social media. So there's all different ways. And again, you go back to who you are and really reflect on how God has wired you. And so you've got to be able to invest in yourself spiritually, emotionally, and physically to maintain that margin so that you're not redlining or crossing over. Because once you start to fill up that margin, that's when that self-medicating happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So when somebody is set up, whether you want to call it the boundary or the margin or whatever, what verbiage would you use? Like when you talk about redlining, What is the line between redlining and not redlining? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a word for that you use?
I don't know if there's a specific word that we use other than just thinking about that red line that separates the margin from the body of a piece of paper. So I'll just go
Okay.
back to that, just that red line. When you get to
Yeah.
that red line, all right, now that's a kind of a yellow flag that we need to kind of stop and pause and rethink things.
All right. So then, what does that margin time look like? Does it have to be time? Is it a time thing? Is it an activity thing? I suppose your answer is probably going to be something like it depends on who you are. But um, yeah, when you say we're not crossing into the margin, does that mean? I guess what behaviors are you encouraging when you say that?
I think it starts with being able to say yes and no to different things that you're asked in ministry. So while there are, duties within a call, oftentimes when you get into a ministry setting over time, there's one more thing that's asked of you, one more thing that's asked of you. And, we as ministers of the gospel sometimes feel like we're under compulsion to do whatever we can to advance ministry. And maybe we fall into the trap of ministry idolatry. I'll call it that, where the ministry becomes the gold calf, and we got to remember that if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so the more we say yes, we're saying no to something else, and usually it starts with no to our own health, and then no to relationships that we may have. And then you start to kind of spiral, and that's where you start to see anxiety, depression, burnout, resignation, bad choices, etc.
Yeah. So you've emphasized the need for physical. You said physical, spiritual, and you say emotional. Was that the third one?
Yes.
Physical,
Yeah.
emotional, and spiritual health. Um, I'm curious what you mean when you say health in each one of those things, because it is a little bit of a subjective term, right?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So so maybe an analogy, think of a sandwich, and I'll call it the SEP sandwich: spiritual, emotional, physical. And if your spiritual health is dialed in along with your physical health, that emotional piece usually kind of just takes care of itself most of the time, just kind of nestles in there. So spiritually, what do we mean by spiritual health? I would think about these three subcategories: being in the Word outside of your ministry duties. How are you in the Word? Um, and when are you in the Word? Privately, or in small group Bible study, or couples Bible study, or large group Bible study, but primarily just how are you in the Word outside of your ministry duties? That's where it starts. I think where we see issues is when we start to just kind of, number one, think that, hey, I'm in the Word every day in ministry work as I prepare this sermon or this devotion, and so I'm good. And it becomes very transactional. And once your spiritual life becomes transactional, it becomes very shallow. And all of a sudden, you can find yourself kind of living two lives: the one life where you're talking the talk, and then behind the scenes, not walking the walk. And so, just being in the Word in a more of a transformational way. So, in the Word, your prayer life, which is part of your worship life. And then I think just service, being in ministry, we are serving constantly, but, maybe just think about how can we serve the kingdom as a whole outside of our call, so we're not on the clock. And that could be as simple as, building a stronger relationship with your neighbor and, sharing the love of Jesus with them. Or it could be volunteering for something at your church outside of your call. But I would categorize those three areas as ways to be spiritually healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I used to think about it, and I'm sure I will again soon, specifically with service outside of like the work I'm called to do, it was I'll just check off in my head, like, what am I doing at church that I'm not getting paid for? And obviously still saying no to a lot of things. That was a big lesson for me, was just learning to say no to stuff. And oftentimes stuff I didn't want to do anyway. Like, yeah, I'm not required to do it. It's not part of my job description. Um, it's not something I enjoy or something I want to do, and yet I feel obligated to do it anyway. And then when I do it, I end up, I like your term, redlining it. I think it's more of an engine capacity, right? Like, you're just
Yeah.
you're gonna blow the engine eventually.
Yeah.
But just learning to say no to some of those, and not saying that you say no to everything you don't want to do all the time. That's a whole different problem. But yeah, just learning to say no to things, you know, so that you're not in that space. What does you kind of outline the principles for a healthy spiritual life? What does that look like practically for you? Like, what's your I guess what's your devotional life look like? What's your prayer life look like? Just as an example for us to kind of.
Yeah, good question. And before I get to that, just your thoughts on yes and no and saying more. Paul Tripp in his book Lead, talks about this, and I heard him just speak one time on a video about this. Sometimes the most godly thing for us to do is to say no, for the good of not only our personal health, but also for the good of the ministry. Because once you start saying yes and doing things under compulsion, that's not healthy or good for anyone.
Yeah. Paul Tripp has the best mustache in the business by a long
Beautiful.
shot.
I envy that. Yeah.
I don't remember if this came from his book, because a couple buddies and I went through that a couple of years ago. I don't remember if it's in the book or if it was in a talk that we just kind of watched when we were around it. I also listen to his podcast every once in a while. But at some point I heard Paul Tripp say, he recounted a story where he's looking somebody in the eye and he's saying, I know you want me to, but I'm going to say no for your sake, so that I can say yes, when I need to, which, I mean, it's sometimes it is that, I don't want to say transactional, but sometimes it is that simple of like you're going to need me, and I'm not going to be here when you need me if I can't just say no now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. So back to your question on, my spiritual habits. And so I'm I am by far a truly sanctified individual, and none of us will be on this side of heaven. So, my habits, I just pray that God continues to work through them to transform me, but I kind of go into different seasons of growth and how I approach it. Right now, I'm working through a chapter of the Bible, about 10 minutes. And it doesn't have to be a full chapter. Sometimes if I just get through part of it and really kind of just chew on something, then I'll do that. So again, I don't want it to make it transactional. It's not like I need to get through X amount a day. It's like, all right, what is God speaking to me about today? What is he telling me about himself today? It's not, what can I get out of this? I think more so it's healthy to think about what is God revealing to me about himself through this. So I like to alternate Old Testament with New Testament, so I'll read an Old Testament book and then jump to the New Testament and work through a New Testament book. So I like that. I'll also take a look at YouVersion. I've got YouVersion on my phone, and I always start off my day with just taking a look at the verse of the day and just kind of pondering that and thinking through that, and then going into reading a chapter, and then taking a look at a devotion. Sometimes it's a devotion off of YouVersion. Sometimes it's Time of Grace devotion. And then noontime, I've got a Chad Bird devotional book. I love Chad Bird's writing. That's a good question, Charlie. I should know this. It's the one on Old Testament. And
Footsteps of the Prophets. No, backpacking with the hitchhiking with the prophets.
I think that's the one. I think that's it. But I don't. He just does an incredible job of unpacking, uh, the Hebrew language and really helping that come to life. So I'll take a look at that over lunch break. And with my position now, I've got a little bit more flexibility where I can do that.
I've really enjoyed Chad Bird's devotional book on the life of Jacob as well.
Okay.
Another excellent one.
I'll check that out. Yeah, he's an incredible writer and just a very incredible story when you dig into his life as well. I've got a bird dog, Bella, a German short hair pointer, and she needs to be walked every day. And so on one of my walks, usually I'll just take time and just work through prayer. Right now I'm using just the ACTS framework: adoration, confession, thanks, supplication, and then end it with the Lord's Prayer. And so, I'll kind of get in my walk and kind of get in my talk with God, and maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes goes by in conversation with God. And that is something I've really appreciated. I don't think in my time as a principal, I dedicated enough time just being in prayer. And I have all the excuses for it as far as time and whatever. But I've really intentionalized that lately, and that's been really healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. And I definitely need to be more intentional about my prayer life, but I like to walk. I'm a walker. I love to lift, but especially at this point in seminary, it just isn't. It depends. Sometimes I have time, sometimes I don't. And you'll go through weeks, sometimes a month or two, where you have all the time in the world, and then you're busy, and then back and forth. Right? It's part of life. But I never sacrifice the walking. So this time of year, it's getting tougher to walk inside. But like especially during the winter months around here, like you don't want to be outside anyway, especially in the morning. So I'll wake up in the morning. I've got a little walking pad in my room and a standing desk, and start with. Right now, I'm going through just. I realized middle year at the seminary, we don't really spend any time in the Gospels because of the classes that we're taking, like for study. So I thought, what a great opportunity to spend some time in the Gospels then. So I'm just working my way through the Gospels, about a chapter a day, give or take. Yeah. So I start with a psalm, and then whatever the proverb is that coincides with the date, because there's 31 chapters in Proverbs. So whatever the date is, and that makes it simple too. If you miss a day or whatever, you can just pick up on whatever the date is.
Sure.
And then a reading from somewhere else. Right now it's the Gospels. And then I've got Luke Thompson, when I graduated the second time from MLC, gave me a book called, I think it's just called Day by Day, but it's daily readings from Luther. It's not even prayers or anything, just daily readings from Luther. I know a lot of the guys that have learned the Greek and Hebrew like to do Treasures Old and New. Frankly, I don't. Maybe I should, but I don't. And then I started reading. It started a couple of years ago. We did a podcast series on the Catechism, on Luther's Large Catechism, and just walked through all the parts. And he, in his Large Catechism, talks about how the Catechism is meant to be a daily devotional tool. How he designed it so that you just continue, like every day, you read one of the chapters of the Catechism, and you keep reading through it, and that's your daily study. And I thought, well, I should keep doing that. But even though I've taken 2 or 3 different classes on the Augsburg Confession, I've never actually read the Confessions. So now I'm reading through the Concordia Reader's Edition of the Confessions. Whenever I'm done with my Bible study, whatever time I have left, and I walk until it's time to go take a shower. And I'm in the dorms, so I get a couple of roommates, and whenever they're done showering, then I get in there. And just that habit every day of doing that, one is completely unrelated to whatever we're doing at school, which, I mean, it's tough when you're spending, like, really, this is my job for now, right? And it's the same thing is true for pastors and teachers. It can be, it's tough to deal with whatever text or whatever material you're working with. As a professionally, it's hard to also do that devotionally. So I like to completely divorce it from whatever I'm doing for school. And then I walk throughout the day too. So after lunch, I'll go for a walk, and then sometime in the evening, most days I'll go for a walk. And that's when I talk to God. And sometimes I don't want to say more productive than others. It's easier than others sometimes. But even just the ability to have the conversation with your Heavenly Father, right? And we have a God who loves, if he redeemed you, do you think how can the God who clothed himself in flesh and redeemed you not also want to know you and have a relationship with you, right?
Right. Yeah. You think about our three kids are now, adults, and as parents, we still are, you know, eager to just have a conversation with our kids. Two of them live down in Florida, and so we, whether it's texting or phone calls or FaceTiming or whatever, we look forward to that. And you think about that with our, Heavenly Father, He's just eager, wanting to have a conversation with us, and just taking that time to do it. And what a beautiful, you know, beautiful way to do it is get out in His creation, move a little bit, your mind's thinking a little bit more clearly, and just open up and have that conversation.
Yeah. Professor Schutze, who just retired from the seminary, likes to talk about looking at the tops of trees. Go for a walk and look at the tops of the trees.
Love it.
You can't look around at all the wonderful things that God has done and not end up with a smile on your face eventually. So
Yeah, love it.
yeah. And I think you would probably agree with me here. Find something that works for you, right? If you're not a morning person, maybe waking up and sitting down in your recliner with a Bible isn't the best idea because you're just gonna fall back asleep, and that's okay if that's the case,
Yeah,
right? You don't have to
yeah.
get up in the morning and walk. You don't have to get up in the morning and go sip coffee and read the Bible. Maybe it's something you do in the evening, but just find something that works for you, and making it something that you can do habitually.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a firm believer in habit stacking. So just find some of those routines that you already have naturally, and then just stack it with that. For example, many in the ministry get in their car and drive to campus every day. All right, that's a habit that just naturally happens. So throw in a podcast, or listen to the word on the way. So just find some ways to build it into your schedule, so that it's automated. That's the difference maker. And I really feel, there's so many great resources out there, commentary wise or devotional wise, and all of them have value. But I think about Professor Hartwig that I had at my time at MLC, teaching foundations of history, and just always talked about it's so important to go back to the primary source. He compared it to the springs, that feed rivers. You got to go back to the spring to get the cleanest information. And I think sometimes we can kind of fall into a pattern of this devotional, that devotional, or this resource. Hey, let's just go back to the spring and drink from it directly.
Mm-hmm. Would you rather hear what somebody said? Like, would you rather hear somebody report on what somebody said? Or would you rather hear them say it?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Go to that primary source,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. You mentioned couples devotions. I've heard people go either side on that, right? The idea that everybody should be doing it independently. Also the idea that it can be a tremendous growth experience for a couple. What do you think?
Yeah, that's another one I'm going to say. It depends on the couple, and some guys that I coach, that works really well for them, and it grooves really well. And for others, it's too forced. In my own personal life, my time with Amy, I think there is kind of a romantic idea in my head of sitting down and studying the word together. But in reality, she's into the word deeply on her own, and I am. And then we'll have spiritual conversations, but we're not sitting around a devotion every day. Maybe at some point we do that, but I don't necessarily feel like that is bad. I don't think I think you can go one way or the other with it, as long as you're both in the word and both having conversations with each other. You've got to be able to communicate in a Christ-centered manner.
Yeah. What did you do with your kids? Did you guys do daily devotions and things with your kids, or?
We did devotions, in the dinner time, and our kids were naughty and always goofing around in those devotions. So that would, I probably got upset many times with just them goofing around. But yeah, that's what we tried to do. And then, we tried to spend some time, you know, as they were younger, with them individually before going to bed, in prayer or just talking. And then as they got to be teenagers, that's an interesting time in that, schedules are busy. Trying to have a family devotion time just doesn't work. And they oftentimes don't want to talk anyways, but every once in a while you'll get them where all of a sudden they just start to talk and open up. And usually it's like at a time where you want to be in bed, go to bed. And so, you just kind of have to be ready. All right, I guess he's or she's wanting to talk now. So, all right, we got to do this. So, and then you have opportunities maybe to talk about faith and life and whatnot.
Yeah. All right. So spiritually healthy. You said emotionally healthy kind of settles in if you get to do things right, hopefully.
Yeah.
What does physical health look like? What are the standards that you're looking for?
Yeah. So what we look for is, first of all, your fuel, how you're fueling up your body. So what are your eating habits like? And I'm not uh, a dietitian or a nutritional coach, but there are just general ideas that we want to follow. As far as like, hey, the closer the way God made the food, probably the healthier it's going to be. The more processed it is, probably less healthy it's going to be, and the more calorie dense it's going to be. So, all right, let's pay attention to that. So, eating just more of a healthy manner, tracking calories, and there's so many apps out there that can help you do that. I'm big into protein intake. I think that should be a foundational thing for a lot of folks. I prescribed zero point 0.8 to 1.0 grams per targeted body weight. Just in my research, that seems to be what we should kind of target. And if you kind of start with your target calories and your protein intake and kind of build it out from there, generally you're in pretty good shape. Alcohol intake, comes in with your diet, along with soda. And so we've got, that whole realm of food. And then sleep, is a biological marker that's critical for so many of us. And what are we doing in the evening for good sleep hygiene? Shutting down screens or just getting our minds to kind of take things, offline and get ready for sleep. And just maintaining consistency there. And then, exercise and firm believer in working out. That was something that, became a priority for me when I was a principal in Houston. You get to be in your 20s and 30s, you can kind of get by with maybe not as much emphasis on it, but even so, that kind of can take a toll on you. But when this whole idea of spiritual, emotional, and physical wellness kind of really just clicked with me was actually on Galveston Island. We had a pastor teacher conference together, and Rick Lowen was a speaker there. I'd never heard of him, but the guy showed up, and the dude was buff.
And that little tiny T-shirt.
Yeah, in that tiny T-shirt, and his story about being undercover in the Twin Cities just like captured my attention, and really introduced me to the three-legged stool. And it was kind of from that, that was kind of an aha moment. From that kind of point on, I tried to be a little bit more intentional. And my time at Faith, my wife and I belonged to a gym where we would go to 5:15 a.m. workouts regularly. And I knew that as a principal, if I was going to work out, it's going to have to be in the morning, because evenings were filled with meetings and stuff with kids and whatnot. So that's a challenge, but it's well worth it. Like that really helped me just be energized for the day, come into the day with a clear thought, emotionally balanced. That was so important for me as a school leader.
Yeah. What are your starting points? Somebody says, I'm a mess. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm burning out. What are your starting points?
You can't do everything, but you can do something. So let's start off by just getting some movement in. Let's just get out for a walk. Can you get out for a walk for 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Just get movement in. And we want to, I think about James Clear and Atomic Habits, the power of 1%. Just start stacking some small wins. And then you can start to compound that and start to push yourself a little bit more. So same thing with just food. Number one, just write down everything that you're eating for a week and just take a look at it. And then, find an app, any free app out there that can help you track your calories and your macros and just kind of see where you're at. I think that's a good start. And then, with sleep, just do kind of a self check. What does my evening look like? Um, am I turning things off, 30 minutes to an hour before bed? What's my evening routine like? So I'm kind of being able to wind down and get in some deep sleep. So I think, those are simple things that everyone can start with, and it's zero cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, there's a measure of just having, like, if you can establish a little bit of control, that goes a long way too, right? So if
Yeah.
there's something I can control, that'll give me a little bit of momentum moving forward as well.
Yeah, that we're wired for dopamine hits, and if you can just get a little bit of experience, a little bit of success, all of a sudden you gain a little bit of more confidence, and that's when you can start stacking things.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to, every once in a while, I mean, I eat in a cafeteria every day and I'm busy. So
Yeah.
there are days where I just don't have time to get in and do a proper lift or anything like that. But I can make sure I can wear my Fitbit and get 10,000 steps. Um, if I every once in a while I can fast for a couple of days, and that kind of gets, at least then I'm in control. It's not really probably changed any health outcomes or anything, but it kind of gives you that sense that I'm in. I don't know if everybody's wired that way, but it just kind of gives you that sense that I have a little bit of control over what I'm doing, especially when life kind of starts to spin out of control a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think that's healthy. Just do a reset, something like that. Yeah. And it doesn't take much, if you can find 10 minutes in your day, everyone can find 10 minutes in their day to get a walk in, to do some body weight stuff. I mean, you can go on YouTube and find all sorts of, 10-minute workouts for men and women. And, and you can get a good 10-minute workout in. So just be consistent is the big deal. It's not what you do occasionally, it's what you do consistently.
Yeah. I also, this is not an information problem, right?
Yeah.
Especially for Americans. These health issues that we have, emotionally or physically, um, are not, well, spiritually too. It's not a resource problem. It's not a know-how problem. It's an actually doing it problem, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we can find ways to actually do these things. You're heading in the right direction.
So, you think about willpower versus automation. If you just rely on willpower, some people are super disciplined and can get that going, but how can you find ways to automate and just build things that are already into your schedule? I'll go back to habit stacking or priming your environment, right? I'm putting my workout clothes out before I go to bed so that when I wake up, I see them. I'm putting my Bible out by the coffee maker so that when I grab a cup of coffee, I can grab the Bible. So priming your environment is also another good way to kind of get the pump primed and started.
All right. Now, emotional health. You said if you can get your physical and spiritual health in the right place, emotional health hopefully will also kind of fall into place.
Yeah, I think in the world of modern psychology, which has its place, but there is so much emphasis on let's give someone a label and let's give them a medication and things will be okay. And certainly there are times where that needs to happen. But before that, let's take a holistic approach to things. Let's take a look at your spiritual habits and your physical habits and see if we can make some changes there first and see how you respond before we do anything else. So, emotionally, when I think about emotional health, I think about these three areas. First of all, your mindset, and specifically a growth mindset. So I feel like if you are an individual that is seeking to grow personally, professionally, spiritually, that keeps our mind healthy, keeps our mind focused on positive things. Super important. Relationships. A lot of research says that your emotional health is very much tied in with your relationships. So how are we? First of all, investing in our relationship with ourself, with our Lord, with others, and then with inanimate objects, right? Like food, alcohol, social media, all those things play a part on our emotional health. And I think the third category is just EI, emotional intelligence. How are we continuing to just try to learn more about how God, designed us with feelings and emotions and better understanding that? I grew up and probably a lot of guys do, like men don't talk about their feelings, their emotions, and it's just something that you just kind of like bottle up or kind of just recede to the background and not deal with, or they build up and you explode in a way that you later regret.
Yeah. I don't even remember. I'm trying to remember what podcast it was. Um, it might not even been a podcast, or it might have been John Baki. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
Somebody along the way in the last couple of years told me that every single man on the planet should read "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus," the book.
Yeah.
And I kind of rolled my eyes at that. No, 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 no. So that must have been a real conversation. I think it was John Baki. I don't know for sure. Sorry, John, if it wasn't you. But in the idea of if you want to understand yourself better as a man, like as far as what's going on emotionally and so forth, and if you also want to understand the women around you better, whether or not it's your spouse, right? Um, we deal with each other constantly. Like everybody, you're just people in your life that you need to and so I did. I read the book, and I wouldn't say that anything in the book was particularly revolutionary. But one of the things he kept saying over and over and over again is you have to practice. And maybe didn't say it in that many words, but if you want the relationship with the women at work to be better, spend some more time with your mother. Right? You want your
Mm-hmm.
relationship with the guys at church to be better, spend some more time with your brothers, right? Like those types of things. And then also, it very clear. I think I don't want to say that there wasn't any value to the book because there certainly was. And I'm probably going to read it again, frankly. Um, but it's information that is again readily available to everybody, right? It's not new information.
Right.
But just being intentional about understanding the people around you also makes your relationship with them better. And when you have a better relationship with the people around you, all of a sudden you're getting loved on a little bit more. And it's like, again, you don't want to make all these relationships transactional, but it's going to be good for you in the long run too, to be better at dealing with other people.
Yeah, just gets me thinking about Stephen Covey and, his idea of making deposits with others. And in order to make a deposit, I need to make a connection with you. I need to get to know you. I need to build you up. But when we do that, we're actually we're relational beings. God made us relational. And so we function best when our relationships are healthy. And you're exactly right. It takes a little bit of work to do that.
Yeah. All right. The attrition rate among teachers in the public sector, it's like the lifespan of a teacher is like 2 or 3 years. In Synod schools, it's better than that, but it's still not great. What I don't have a do you happen to have a number? We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but
Yeah, I don't know what those numbers are, but I saw a recent study put out by the Walton Foundation, the Sam Walton Foundation, that said, now this was with public school teachers, that 1 out of every 5 teachers are thinking about just stepping out of teaching. And so while I don't know what it is within our well circles, it would not surprise me if, that's just statistic is similar.
Yeah. And I mean, teacher statistics are tough too, because a lot of young teachers are young women, and they're getting married, they're having children and so forth. So statistics are tough.
Yeah.
But like across the board, it's a startling rate of attrition among teachers. And it's not a whole lot different in our Lutheran schools either. Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, so I think the first 5 years is super critical. I think research would support that. If we can get someone through the first 5 years, the likelihood of them sticking out long term is going to be there. So I think those are critical years. But in general, why is it that that we're seeing, less kids want to become teachers and, more resignations? Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Ministry's hard and it smacks you in the face. And I think we got to be real with that. We got to be real starting at in college. Like, hey, you are getting into a profession that is really difficult. But it is honorable. It is impactful. I think about the Bible verse, fight the good fight. It is an incredible, great fight to be fighting. So just starting off with the why. I was recently at a biblical worldview conference out in DC, and I heard George Barna speak. And in his research, he said—
Who is George Barna?
George Barna would be from the Barna Research Institute. He does a lot of statistical studies relating to churches and ministry. And he is currently based out of a private university in Arizona. That's where he's actually teaching. But I think he's got a staff that does just a lot of surveys and statistical analysis. But in his research, and I felt this was super interesting and just a reason why being a teacher is so impactful. In his research, he's found that pretty much an individual's worldview is set by the time they're 13. So think about that for a moment. We've got a window of opportunity for this next generation to bring them up in the way of the Lord. And teachers within our Lutheran schools get to be on the front line, being able to impact that generation. And so I think sometimes we just need to kind of step back and let's just take a look at why we're doing this. Like, this is super impactful. Now, that doesn't make, the day-to-day grind easier, but I think if you have that mission-centered paradigm, that certainly provides motivation to keep going. So I think that's number one. Number two is, how are we providing support as a school system for these called workers? Who's walking alongside them? Because it can be a super lonely job, and I shouldn't call it a job, right? It's a way of life, right? It can be a super lonely way of life, and if we don't intentionally put networks and support systems around them, then they are gonna let whether themselves, Satan, or the world creep in and, hey, this isn't worth it. Hey, so-and-so is making more money over here, doing less, putting in less hours. Let's go do that. Or, hey, you need some relief here. Just dabble in this a little bit and just to kind of escape, So I think we need to put that network up. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just believe in coaching as a way to build up our teachers, staff, ministers, so they can, be the best version that God made them to be, to impact that generation, and provide that biblical worldview that they can take with them now and into eternity.
Yeah. Absolutely. You, this is gonna sound like it's off the wall. I'm a big fan of Arthur Conan Doyle, and I just finished re-listening to all of or the whole um, Sherlock Holmes collection on audiobook,
Awesome.
like throughout the school year, just because they're like 35 minutes to an hour long. So I'll listen to them in the evening and sip on a whiskey before I go to bed or whatever it is, and it's just a nice way to calm down and end the day.
You're my
Um,
hero, man. I need to do that.
they're awesome. And the one the one on Audible for free on Audible is all Stephen Fry from what is it? The British comedy guys.
Uh,
Like the Flying Circus and
Monty
Monty
Python?
Python. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he does an incredible, he does all the voices and everything. He does an incredible job. It's excellent. But there's a character in one of the stories who Arthur Conan Doyle describes as having the bearing that only men who spend a lifetime working with animals or young men have. And first of all, you've got that bearing, like this, that calm manner about you. But that's true of like when I didn't think about it until right now. It's true of a lot of, the men. I think he's onto something, right?
Yeah.
It's true of a lot of the men specifically, but women too, who work with young people consistently from one year to the next, and also are working with their parents and everything that comes with all that, right? And it's not an easy thing to learn. It's not an easy world to navigate. And then, in some ways, in some very prominent ways, working in Christian schools is better and easier and so forth. And in some pretty prominent ways, it's not, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
whole nother element that you're also dealing with that you can kind of write off when there isn't a spiritual component. Um, and what I kind of hear you saying is we need to keep everybody in the game long enough to get to that point where they can settle into like an identity, if you will, as a teacher and understand what their place in the picture is and what their place in the classroom is and what that life looks like.
Yeah.
But
I think everybody is searching for, identity, meaning, and purpose. And, our Lutheran school teachers are no different. And so if we can help them and just reassure them, their identity in Christ, um, their purpose to help raise up a next generation for the Lord, and, just having meaning in what you're doing on a daily basis. While you can't necessarily see the results in a day's time, the meaning of you can make a difference in this kid's life that will carry with them, and who knows how that multiplies, and I'll talk about my own upbringing for a moment. And so my parents divorced at the age of 3, and my mom and I kind of floated around, lived with my grandpa and grandma for a while, and my mom remarried when I was 4. And uh, you know, fortunately, my mom's side were God fearing and part of our Lutheran church in Fort Collins, Colorado. In fact, my grandparents were some of the founding members. The Herkstroeter side is totally unchurched. All my family out there today are unchurched. But my mom married into a family who was also Lutheran. And so my stepdad made it a priority for me to go to Lutheran grade school. And when I look back on that, Steve Zelmer, who was longtime religion teacher at Wisco, was my teacher and principal growing up. He had just a tremendous impact on my life, and encouraged me to think about ministry, and just kind of nudged me in a loving manner to think about that. Just kind of, and things just kind of progressed from there to Nebraska Lutheran, to MLC, and all of a sudden, I'm in the ministry. And as I look back, things could have really gone sideways for me in a lot of ways. But by the grace of God, I look back at that Christian education as just a really important time. I just saw a statistic recently, the 4 major influencer in a child's life, their parents, um, church, school, education, and pop culture and social media. All right. So parents, I would love to say that, everybody has 2 parents who love them and love God, but that's not the case these days, unfortunately. And I lived that somewhat. When you think about church, when you kind of calculate out between kindergarten and 12th grade, when you think about going to church services and maybe special church events, that's probably about 1,500 hours total. Okay, so that's significant. Pop culture and social media, it's estimated that, from kindergarten through 12th grade, 20,000 hours of influence that we are battling. Now, the good news is in the educational world, and especially Christian education, from kindergarten to 12th grade, 16,000 hours. So we have got an opportunity to influence kids in a positive manner because they are getting it for sure from somewhere else.
Yeah. Why this? Why you're the kind of guy that could be good at anything, right? Or you could have been successful doing something else.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I maybe.
Right? Well, you could have found something.
Yeah,
Right?
sure. Yeah.
And you probably would have done well. Why this? Why teaching and now why coaching?
Yeah, it goes back to it's made all the difference in the world for me personally. And I feel like it's, God's put on my heart to, make a difference then for the next generation. And loved every minute of teaching and coaching and serving as a school leader. And now I just, this is kind of a progression where maybe my influence can even be, God willing, at a bigger scale, by which I can help, help individuals really be just understand who they are and how God's designed them so that they can be at their best serving God and others.
Yeah, somebody got to shepherd the shepherds.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What does coaching look like?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because there's a lot of different feelings and flavors and ideas of what coaching is and is not. So maybe I'll just kind of use an analogy of this. If you and I were out on a hiking trail, and we have a therapist or a counselor come up beside us. He or she's going to say, "Hey, Charlie, tell me about your last mile, and let's talk about the past, and maybe somewhere on the trail, you really had a hard time, and you're kind of stuck in that spot, and I'm going to help you unpack that." All right, cool. That's that. There's a place for that, and sometimes that's needed, but that's not coaching. We could have a consultant come up to us, and that consultant say, "Hey, Charlie, I am the expert of this trail. This is how you need to, attack this trail." All right, cool. There's a place for consulting. We could have a mentor come up and walk alongside us, and the mentor could say, "Hey, I'm familiar with this trail. I've been down this trail before, and I've got some suggestions for you. Maybe not quite as strong as a consultant, but just, suggestions of how you could best move down the trail." A coach is going to come up beside us and say, "Hey, tell me about, let's talk about where you're at on the trail. Where do you want to go? And let me be a thought partner with you on how to get there." So there's point A, there's point B. A coach is there to help you get from point A to point B, not through advice, not through, here's the secret sauce, but more of helping you examine who you are and helping you clarify your thoughts and your goals and strategies for getting to point B.
Yeah. All right. Imagine somebody's listening to this and not necessarily called worker. They're not necessarily happy with what they got going on at the moment, and they hear you talking about coaching. They hear you talking about support and so forth, and they don't know where to start on any of that. Right? Like I want to have the kind of relationships you're talking about. I would love to have the kind of support that you're talking about. But I don't have the built-in structures that maybe a teacher would have to be able to pursue that kind of support and help.
Yeah.
What then?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, so Grace in Action, we are primarily focused in on teachers and staff ministers, but we are starting to coach lay individuals as well. And so we're always a resource if someone wants to just have a conversation, and I'd be happy just to have a conversation with them and kind of see where they're at. There are plenty of coaches out there on all different levels, whether it's executive coaching or nutrition coaching or fitness coaching. Our coaching is going to be more faith-based coaching, where we're going to be able to provide just walking alongside someone in a manner that is going to be Christ-centered. And we're not going to tell them what to do, but we'll provide a framework by which they can kind of determine themselves where they want to go spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Because I feel like no matter if you are pastor, a teacher, a staff minister, a doctor, a lawyer, a plumber, whatever it is, as a Christian, your foundation of spiritual, emotional, and physical health is really translates to wherever God's calling is for you in life.
Yeah, and we all have a couple of different vocations, but one very significant one in common, right? And that's simply being a child of the King. So what does that look like?
Amen. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
awesome. Anything you want to tie a bow on or anything like that before we call it quits here?
Charlie, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to just come and have a conversation. What you're doing here is super impactful. Keep that up. The world is starving for, meaning, purpose, and identity. And what you're doing here is helping people claim that in the vein of Christ. And that is a super meaningful work. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I'll follow up then. What is it about you personally um, that like you mentioned, things could have gone differently, right? And you credit it to some degree, at least, Christian education and wonderful influences along the way. But what is it about? Like, I guess I don't know how else to ask the question. How did you end up here, right? In a position where not only have you excelled now as a principal to the point where you're being asked then to coach and mentor and things like that, but I can't imagine this isn't a journey to kind of get to this point, right? Um, so I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask the question, but not everybody comes out the other side healthy, happy, and emotionally, physically, and spiritually healthy, right? And you mentioned Rick Lowen along the way and some of those other big kind of like uh, mile marker moments, right?
Yeah.
But I guess maybe what what makes you different than anybody else that isn't necessarily had the same outcomes? What do you think? I know that's probably not a fair question to ask you, but
Yeah. I don't know if I'm different than anyone else. I'm a jar of clay and with many faults, and you know, my spiritual, emotional, and physical health, and just me as a Christian man, it continues to be challenged in many ways, like anyone else. So I don't have all the answers, but I am hungry, and I continue to search out the Lord and just the resources that He provides me. I think you know I've been super blessed just throughout ministry to have many opportunities to serve and to consider serving. And kind of the pattern that I found was, and I went through times where man, should I be in ministry? Should I be doing something else? I think if you're human and you're in ministry, you're going to feel that. So if you're out there listening to this in ministry and you have that feeling, that's a valid feeling, number one. And so own that feeling, really explore that, put that, to test with the Lord in prayer and word, and just talk with people, because you can't serve the Lord outside of ministry. So, I guess that's number one. But, the times in my ministry where I started to kind of like become distracted with, this could be easier, this might be better or whatnot, or be distracted by call lists like, oh man, I wish that I could consider that call, which I've got an issue with our call list. I think sometimes it leads to like covetousness. But anyway, that's for
Well,
a
I
whole
served on
different.
the nominations committee for a little while. Talk about you see some of those come across. You go, oh, I can put my name in for that one,
Yeah.
But
So when I started to kind of, veer off, I felt like that's when I started to kind of question things and struggle with things the most. But when be, you know, maybe it was someone who dialed me back in, maybe it was God working through a different way, and just like where my feet are planted, I need to just serve the Lord wholeheartedly right here, right now. And when that happened, it just seemed like God blesses that. Not for, my benefit, but for his kingdom. So, I guess that would be my answer to that is, that's, in the end, God's given me those opportunities, I think, through that.
yeah, love it. It's a wonderful answer. Appreciate that that you're willing to sit down with us. Appreciate the way you love on the people around you. It's evident that you care about the people you're coaching. The way you talk about raising up the next generation of kids and having the impact that a teacher can have and that a teacher of teachers can have is I don't want to say impressive because you're not going to like that word, but um, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to be around. So appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks
you.
for your time.
Thank you, everyone out there. Keep fighting the good fight.
Amen. We'll make sure we put links down in the show notes below so you can get in touch with Shawn and see some of the things that he's doing. I'll also make sure there's all the Gird Up links down in the show notes below as well. Please consider supporting the work that we do here at Gird Up, especially if it's something that you find valuable. And God bless you all. We'll talk to you next week.